Good morning. Hope that your Wednesday's off to a good start. Mine is so far. Obviously, I'm in my outdoor office with a second cup of coffee. It's Bigfoot mode this time. Oh man, I love this weather. So, if you've been listening in the last several weeks, I've been giving short thumbnail sketches of the various books of the Bible. I started several weeks ago just looking at the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, Genesis through Deuteronomy, and then I looked at Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. Then from that, Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah last week, and for right now, I'm just going, 2 or 3 books at a time, through the Old Testament in the Christian ordering. Our Jewish cousins order the books somewhat differently, not that it's worse or better, but just different ordering. And going through sort of sequentially, and according to the Christian canon, after Ezra and Nehemiah, we get to Esther and Job. And there's no great linkage between these 2 books at all, but they just fall side by side in the canon. And then next week, Esther, Job, and Psalms. Next week will be Psalms. So with these 2 books, Esther, in terms of when it took place, would be one of the last books, one of the last events chronologically in the Old Testament. And this takes place after the exile in Persia, to catch you up a little bit. So the Babylonians are the nasty bullies on the block that had destroyed Jerusalem and hauled all the people of Judah into exile. And some 50 years later, another big bad bully on the block came along and defeated the Babylonians, and they were the Persians. And it was during this Persian reign that we find Queen Esther. And because a king is mentioned, Ahasuerus, aka Artaxerxes, we can know when the events of Esther took place. They took place somewhere in the 460s to 480s BC. And this is after a lot of the exiles have returned. Of course, not everyone who was sent in exile returned back home. Some of them did, but not all of them. And Esther would have been amongst those that did not return. So in this 460s to 480s BC era, we find the events of the book of Esther. As far as the author, that authorship is totally unknown at this point. Some have speculated that it might have been Mordecai, one of the main characters of the book, but it's best to think of Esther as being anonymous, at least the authorship. So Esther is the story of a young Jewish woman who becomes queen, who rises to become queen. And while she is queen, she is informed of a plot to kill, to eradicate her own people, the Jewish people. And she intercedes with the king at the risk of her own life. She intercedes with the king on behalf of her people. And the king grants her wish, and her people are saved. And this leads to the establishment of the Feast of Purim. And Esther is a great story to read. It's a great story to read. You have heroes and villains. You have the great heroine Esther, you have her cousin Mordecai, who is a hero, and then you have Haman, the villain. But beyond being a story with heroes and villains, there's a couple of things that are really important here. One is this, that this book it never mentions God. The word God does not appear in the book of Esther. It's one of only 2 books in the Bible where the word God does not appear. Gold Star from the Preacher, if you can think of the other one. And something else, even though the word God does not appear, this book is a phenomenal example of the interplay between divine providence and human responsibility. The word God does not appear in the book of Esther, but God is throughout it. And you may say God is almost like the main character, even though he's not mentioned. And so we have this incredible interplay between divine providence, God working behind the scenes, and also Esther's agency, and also Mordecai. So anyway, I highly recommend reading this book. It's a great book to read. And the next book, I guess chronologically, and very, very different, is the book of Job. As with most of what we have encountered so far, the book of Job is anonymous. We don't know who wrote the book. That is totally unknown. As far as dating the book, there are 2 different things to consider. When was it written, and when does it appear that it was set? It appears that the character of Job is set very early, maybe in the age of the patriarchs. It is set in the land of Uz in the east. But as far as the dating of the writing of the book, there have been guesses everywhere from the time of Abraham through the exile. And beyond that, take your pick. Job does appear, the name Job does appear in Ezekiel. Ezekiel refers to Job as being a paragon of faith, along with Daniel. But when the book of Job is written is really difficult to pinpoint. And like I said, people have picked dates anywhere from the time of Abraham through to the exile. But the historical character Job is probably pretty early. So when you get to the book of Job, when you open it up, it is unlike anything else in the Bible. We have 2 chapters that are an introduction. 2 chapters that are an introduction to the character of Job, and then over 30 chapters of dialogue between Job and various friends. And then God shows up and speaks personally to Job in the last several chapters of the book. So, in the introduction, we are told about this character Job. Job, we are told, is righteous and he's upright. He's a God-fearing man. And we are also introduced to the Satan. And I use the definite article "the" intentionally because In Job, it is the Satan, Ha-Satan in Hebrew. The Hebrew word Satan, which we transliterate as Satan, in the Old Testament sense, is more like a cosmic adversary or accuser. In the New Testament, the term Satan sort of has come to take on like a cosmic, like ruler of evil. Old Testament understanding is a little different. The term Satan is, like I said, it means accuser or adversary. And in Job chapter 1, the sons of God, or the angels of God, have come to present themselves before the Lord, and amongst them was the Satan. And Satan says, God, are you really sure about this Job guy? You really sure about him? He's been so lucky. He's been so blessed. I bet he's worshiping you. I bet he worships you only because he's been fortunate and blessed. And God grants Satan permission to torment Job. And this happens twice. The first time, Job loses all of his possessions. And after losing his possessions, he still doesn't curse God. Satan is given permission a second time to strike Job, and this time he strikes his health. And again, Job does not curse God. And that leads to 30 plus chapters of dialogue between Job and three friends who come to comfort him, and they offer pretty slim comfort at that. And at the end of that, at the end of the book, God shows up. And for the vast majority of the book, over 30 chapters in this dialogue between Job and his three friends, Job over and over again declares his innocence. I've done nothing wrong. I've done nothing wrong. I've done nothing wrong. Why am I suffering like this? He demands to be able to see God, to confront God face to face. And at the end of the book, God does show up. He speaks out of a whirlwind in Job 38. And Job is, theologically, it's a remarkable book in that it is this long discussion of the problem of evil and suffering, but there's never an answer given. You have this long book, and it's a long book to read, that is a phenomenal discussion into the problem of evil and suffering, why the righteous suffer, why the righteous suffer evil. But there is never an answer that is given. And in a way, that probably makes it even more helpful. So over 30 chapters of these men talking to each other and around each other about why Job has suffered. God shows up, speaks to Job out of a whirlwind, and God never explains to Job why he has suffered. Job never gets an answer from God. Throughout all of these chapters, oh God, why have I suffered? Oh God, he shakes his fist at the heavens. God speaks from the whirlwind, and God doesn't give him an answer. It is simply Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? So perhaps that is the answer. Perhaps the answer is this, that there is no grand cosmic answer to the suffering and the evil that we sometimes experience. There is no cosmic answer to the suffering and the evil that the righteous sometimes experience, but that throughout all the suffering and the evil that can take place, God still reigns. God still reigns. With that, have a great rest of your Wednesday.